Welcome, welcome all. Hopefully everyone is still doing well. Today's workout is an upper body workout. Again, minimalist equipment. We're just going for a resistance band. I will explain throughout the course of the video, if you do not have a resistance band, a suitable alternative or just how to do it without. So jumping right in, my warm up for this was just after a bit of a jog. I done some stretches, some arm circles, some press ups off screen just to get some blood into the upper body, get the joints a bit more mobile. But again, they are fairly inclusive of the warm up in this video, as the movements we're starting off with do tend to do most things included in the warm up. They're getting our heart rate up, they're getting us familiar with the range of motion. So that's why it's not included. Also not included just to really try and keep the time of these videos down so not everyone's bored to death. Hopefully not anyway. The first exercise we did there was an isometric push-up hold. So as you've seen from both profiles, front and side, I lowered myself down to maybe an inch or two off the ground and just held myself in the bottom of the push-up. That is tiring out the chest, the pectoral muscles and the triceps in an isometric position. And essentially the point of this is to fatigue the chest and the shoulders and the triceps, because we don't have a lot of weight like a bench press or a fly machine to do that for us. As soon as we're finished, we go into band resisted press ups. The band just gives us a bit more resistance throughout the movement, especially at the top. Really locking out at the top is your highest amount of resistance, and that's where we want the most to really try and contract the chest and the triceps. You'll see, hopefully from all the angles I do include, that the tricep isn't locking out completely. You're maybe 5 or 6 degrees short. It's just to get as much range of motion in the tricep and the chest as possible. My hand placement for these are quite a bit outside shoulder width, but that's just because it's what's healthy for me. And you'll notice I do flare my elbows a little bit, but mostly when the band's on, and that's just to keep it in place. If you don't have resistance band, essentially just start off with regular push-ups after you've done the isometric, and then again drop into your knees. Not everyone's going to have resistance band, but I do recommend it for this video because it will make a difference. The main point of this upper body day is maybe not to promote new growth for the chest, but hopefully to stimulate the fibers enough that we're not going to lose any muscular strength in our upper body. After the first round there of the chest and shoulders and triceps that we did, I've went into a bit of active recovery just because I'm not very fond of sitting around. This is just one of many suggestions. You could just do sit-ups or crunches, or you could take it as complete rest if you want. I'm doing a very basic lowering of the arms in a dead bug hold just to try and activate the core a bit more. Like I said, you could make this harder or easier, or you could leave it out completely. It's of your own prerogative. Today's first exercise is a little bit of what they call a drop set. Essentially, we reach failure or close to, and then we make it a little easier and we extend past that. It's a method of extending past failure to try and get a little more volume and a little more intensity out of our basic exercises, which is really useful when we've no equipment. So again, we're going to start off with the isometric push-up. So we're lowering to the bottom of the phase. I'm going down quite deep, maybe about an inch or so off the ground, as I've said. That's just because I feel a good stretch on my chest, and I'm able to really feel it across the chest, the triceps, and the shoulder. You mightn't get the 10 to 12 seconds. 5 or 6 could be all you get there. That's fine. Just work with what you can. Don't go to absolute failure, but close enough is quite good for this, because we do want to conserve some energy for the next exercises. The band is then wrapped around my upper back and my hands, kept in place by my shoulders and elbows. Going to do 10 to 12 push-ups. I think I hit failure here, maybe 6 or 7. That's just really demonstrating that after your first set, you should be fatigued enough that 1 or 2 sets of this is enough. Once you're finished the regular push-ups with the band, we're going into just a slightly easier version, bodyweight push-ups. From here, you're going to find you're going to fatigue quite quickly. Again, 68 reps for maybe some of the individuals who aren't used to it as much, but you could get more. I'm stretching out my chest here just to give myself a bit of relief, and then I'm going into the modified push-ups on my knees just to try and force out the last bit of energy, taking a small break to try and get a few more reps. and finishing off with another 2 or 3. Again, you could do this slightly differently. Instead of going to failure, you could pick a number of reps to do. You could do 6 with the band, 6 without the band, and then 6 on your knees. And you could work with more sets. But if you're looking to maybe try and push for a little more growth, a little more intensity, aiming to near failure for each of the sets is probably going to get you the best sort of bang for your buck, if you will. Trying to make these as tense as possible, just because I don't want to be doing 4 or 5 sets and taking up most of the day. 2 sets is enough, especially if you've warmed up thoroughly. This principle is carried over into the next one. What we're going to do is a more shoulder dominant movement. We're going into a rear delt complex, which works our posterior delts and our lateral delts, which is the back and the side of the shoulder. I've crossed over the band over my feet, as you can see, and I'm going into an isometric rear delt raise. I'm not going to the top of the movement, just shy, so there's more tension on the rear delt and the lateral delt as well. I'm saying delt, it is deltoid. It's just years of bad habits of shortening everything. There's more tension in the deltoid because I'm not fully locking out the movement. It's a little bit like the push-up, not the full way down, but most of the way. The next exercise we're moving into here is just plain rear delt raises with a small bend at the hip, keeping the back straight, looking down. I'm switching between side to side here so you can see the movement from a good few angles. Again, starting with maybe the hands at shoulder width and drawing them out at the side using a pronated grip. You will feel this more in your shoulders because you've done the isometric at the start, and that's the point. Again, to fatigue it, the resistance band isn't very strong. So we're doing 3 exercises here. Not the hardest, but in one after the other, they are going to get quite tough. The third exercise we've moved on to are a variation of a T raise. There's very little resistance at the front where my hands are, but as I get further back, I'm pulling the shoulders back, and also contracting the rear delts in a very shortened position because the shoulder girdle is locked down. No elevation there really at all. As I was saying before, the whole point of the isometric is because the band doesn't have a great load of resistance. Just doing each set individually mightn't cause enough stimulus and mightn't cause enough damage to change. But in conjunction with each other, starting with the isometric first to really try and fatigue everything, get those fast twitch muscle fibers out of the way, fatigue them as much as possible, then going into the different reps. Doing the easiest exercise last, so it does feel the hardest because we're already fatigued. Again, starting with the isometric, 12 to 15 seconds is enough. If you are a stronger individual used to doing this all the time, you could maybe go for 20 or 30, but again, you don't want to completely exhaust, just get close to it. It is an isolation exercise and does really only work the back and side of your shoulders, but do try and focus on keeping a slight bend in the knees and the back straight. If you can think about not really using your arms, but ripping the band apart, it gives it a good cue to try and work the shoulders a little bit more as well. Moving on from the rear delt raises, we're going to go into those modified T raises. Similar movement, but the resistance is dragging our hands down. We're resisting that profile, and we're also bringing the shoulders back, which allows us to hit the rear delt a little bit more. Posterior deltoid, if you're trying to be really specific about it. I'm bending down and grabbing more of the band towards my foot because it allows a little bit more of a slack on the horizontal part of the band that you'll see coming close to my chin. That just allows me more to focus on not just dragging my arms up, but dragging them back as well, which is really where we want to hit the most resistance to try and contract the muscles of the shoulder rather than the neck muscles and the trap muscles. Now, I've just done 2 rounds, but I am going to go into a third one. The main purpose is because the first one, I think I cheated quite a little bit. I only done a few seconds of a hold, and I only done a few repetitions. If you are taking these to failure, especially your last exercise to failure on each one of the rounds, 2 rounds will be sufficient. But again, don't be afraid to do more if you do feel that you really want to push yourself and get as much out of it as possible. The same can be said for the first exercise for the push-ups to work the chest, the shoulders, and the triceps. that can be done as well. We can maybe do more rounds with that if you want. And again, as I've mentioned in some of the other videos, the resistance band is going to dictate this quite a bit as well. The yellow one I'm using at the minute is very little resistance, hence why I'm going for more of an isometric. Same with the red one used at the start. They're not a great pile of resistance, so if you have a thicker band, or you have found some other way of resisting yourself, you may need to do less reps for that. Again, folks, use my failures as a little bit of a lesson. Don't let your upper body droop down as much. Try and keep that back straight. Finishing off again with those modified T raises. They're called T raises because you do look like you're drawing a T from the front profile. The great benefit of doing most of these exercises is that you don't need a door anchor, which I've seen a lot of people using. You really only need a band and a little bit of space, which is useful because we don't really want to be using mountains and mountains of equipment. The order that I'm doing these exercises in, not just the exercise after exercise, but the muscles, I feel is an important point to cover as well. We started with chest and triceps. We've moved on to our posterior deltoid, our rear shoulder muscle, and now we're moving into our front and side deltoids, our anterior and lateral deltoids. The reason for this is because if we had done this in the reverse order, you would probably feel the push-up and you would probably feel more shoulder than anything in the push-up when you really want to target the chest. And you would also feel the rear shoulder exercise more in your front and your side, just because they are more dominating muscles and they're going to probably take more of the strain despite being smaller. So this is more just exercise selection to try and get you the most energy out of each muscle part. Whereas if we did them in the opposite order, you'd probably just overload one muscle rather than the targeted ones that we're aiming for here. I've switched resistance bands, and I know that's maybe not ideal for everyone. You may only have one or two. You may only have one. That's okay. I switched over just because the band that I had was starting to get a bit slippy, just because I sweat quite profusely. But again, if you just have the one, stick with the one. The three exercises that have just been demonstrated are all for your front and side shoulder muscles. As said, you really don't hit anything else with these. And essentially, again, they are obscure exercises that only hit those targeted muscles rather than a compound exercise that is going to hit the vast majority. But again, if you do have very little resistance, we're probably going to have to aim for that, because the stimulus again is going to need to be sufficient enough that it's going to drive change. Doing a lot of overhead presses with a resistance band is not going to be enough resistance to build the shoulder muscles, and that's why I'm suggesting these exercises to try and hit those smaller neglected muscles a little bit more. This is also a good opportunity to bring up any weak or lagging body parts, not only in terms of size, but also strength and mobility as well, that we often neglect. So the first exercise we're starting off with here is an isometric for the side and front deltoids. It's a lateral raise with the band crossed over. I don't really have my hand on the band. It's resting on my wrists, and the arms are maybe about 45 degrees out to the side, quite bent at the elbow, just to try and take some stress off the trapezius muscles in the neck. More again focusing on those shoulders. The second exercise we're going into, it's a slightly easier one than the first variation. I've done these crucifix raises at the end on the last set, but because they are slightly more difficult, this is an easier option to do than second when you have more energy. Essentially, you're starting in the middle with an underhand grip and pulling the arms out to the side. As you can see, these are proving quite difficult, especially after the isometric. Then finally, we're moving into the final exercise, which is basic lateral raises. I've uncrossed the band so it's a little easier. The band is resisted over the back of my hand and just sort of kept secure in my thumb to make it a little easier. Reach further down the band, and it means you don't have to stretch it up and out as much. I'm a bit confined in space for this one, so as you'll see, my legs are bent at the knee there. The calves are sort of going vertical in the air, but if you do have a lot more space than I have in this situation, do feel free to keep the legs straight. We're going into a modified extension pose, affectionately known as a Superman pose. And again, we're using our lighter band, or the one band if you just have the one. Doubling it over and crossing it, so it effectively acts as a mini band. This is going to resist us around the wrists or so. I'm securing it a little bit more in place with my thumbs, just because I don't want it slipping off. I want to keep it nice and secure. Throughout this movement, we're going to keep constant tension in that band, and you're going to see why. Again, I'm sort of shuffling down just so everyone can see where my arms are going, what they're doing. And at the very top of that Superman pose, or that extension, I'm sort of mimicking rather lat pull down or pull up. So the arms are going out in front of me nice and straight, the head's going down, and then when I bring my arms in, I'm retracting the shoulder blades and really trying to contract the rhomboid muscles between my shoulder blades, the lats, definitely the upper muscles in the back like the teres major. The lats are more going to keep you upright, much like the erectors of the spine. And that's why, unlike the rest of the exercises where we've done the isometric first, they're going to be done last, and I'll explain why in a moment. We've ditched the band and we're doing the same movement without the band, so it's a bit of a drop set. We're dropping the resistance to carry on past failure. Both of those have been 10 to 12, maybe 15 reps if you're slightly better at this than I am. Sort of struggling today. And then to finish off, we're going into this isometric. So we're contracting the muscles of the upper back, trying to stay rigid as much off the floor with our upper back and our legs as possible. And we're going to go for 15-20 seconds. 15 to 20 seconds for me is about failure after doing the rest. And that's why I'm stopping. But if you need to go to 30 or more or less, that's your own choice. That's what you're going to have to work with. Now, the reason I said we're doing the isometric last in opposition to doing it first in the rest of the exercises is just because of the size of the muscle and the demand that it's going to place. The isometric is held the whole way through, so you're in that constant isometric position while you're doing the pull downs, while you're doing the hands out and the hands in. If we done the isometric first, you would fatigue yourself too much, especially the spinal erectors and the lats, the lower portion of the lats, the latissimus dorsi. So we're doing it last, so we still have energy to do those other muscles. If we had done it the opposite way around, like I was saying, you probably wouldn't get very far into the other two exercises. You wouldn't be able to hit the upper back muscles as much. So they're done first to get them out of the way, and then we can focus on fatiguing the lower back at the end of the movement. Now, as a substitution for this, if you didn't have a band in one of my previous videos, I used a t-shirt. It's something that you can just really have shoulder width grip and apply tension to while you're extending the arms in and out and retracting the shoulder blades. Having the resistance at the start and then dropping to just the arms, as I said before, is a type of drop set. It allows us to go past failure. We're hitting failure on the first one with the band. Reducing the resistance by dropping the band just means it's a little easier to keep going and add in a little more stimulus, fatigue those back fibers a little more, and hopefully have a little bit more of a driver for growth and for adaptation. I took a little mini break there just to hit the allocated reps, a little bit of a rest pause, took a 3-4 second breather, banged out a few more reps just to try and extend the set a bit more. This is a slightly easier option for those of you who maybe can't do the immediate drop set, We're doing one arm at a time. Just makes it slightly easier, and it's a little bit of a change. Dropping back into the regular one, finishing off the upper back musculature, and then we're going to go into our final isometric. The modified Superman, contracting everything, lifting the upper body and lower body off the ground. The only thing that's really making contact with the floor is your hip region and your lower abdomen. Again, trying to go for as long as you can, squeezing all the musculature of the back, and finishing. That was 2 rounds. 2 should be sufficient, but if you do need to go for a third, feel free. And that's us, guys. Thanks very much for tuning in. Hopefully this was helpful. See you next time.